All right, let's dive into a really fascinating question today. How do we actually build a permanent home for humans in space? We're going to look at the whole evolution of space stations, from the very first attempts all the way to these incredible cities in the sky that are being planned as we speak. So let's get right into it. So this is the big question, right? It totally sounds like something out of science fiction, but it's a very, very real engineering problem. And to even start to answer it, we first have to wrap our heads around why space is one of the most hostile places you could possibly imagine for a human being. Okay, so before you can even think about building the house, you have to understand the neighborhood. And in space, the neighborhood is pretty rough. The human body is just under constant attack. You don't have Earth's gravity or its atmosphere, so astronauts are dealing with harmful radiation, their muscles and bones start to waste away, and even their senses can get all thrown out of whack. And all of this is happening inside a tiny sealed can where you have to manage every single drop of water, every breath of air, and all the waste. These are the huge problems you've got to solve first. So facing all of those challenges, what was the first solution engineers came up with? Well, they went with what you might call an all-in-one approach, and this led to the first generation of our homes in orbit, what we now call the era of monolithic stations.
Let's break that term down. A monolithic design is pretty much what it sounds like. Mono means one. The whole idea was to build the entire station right here on Earth, pack it completely full of all the supplies and gear you need, and then launch it into space as one single finished package.
A really great way to think about this is to picture a fully stocked RV on the ultimate road trip. But there's a huge catch. You can never stop for gas or go to the grocery store. As soon as the supplies that were packed inside that station were all used up, that was it. The mission was over. The crew had to leave, and the station was basically just abandoned.
And this design was absolutely put into practice. The Soviet Union's early Salyut stations, and of course America's Skylab, were both monolithic designs. They were incredible achievements for their time, and we learned so much from them, but they all had that same fundamental weakness.
So the key thing to remember about monolithic stations is this. They basically had a built-in expiration date. Once those initial supplies were gone, the station's useful life was over. To build something that could last, something permanent, we needed a completely different way of thinking.
And that breakthrough? It was a total game changer. Modular design. The core idea was pretty revolutionary for the time. Instead of launching a finished station, why not launch the pieces and build it up there in orbit?
Now, this big shift actually started with a really clever little modification on the Soviet Salyut 6 and 7 stations. All they did was add a second docking port. Now, that might sound like a tiny change, but its impact was absolutely enormous. It meant that one port could be for the crew to arrive, while the other could be used for an unmanned cargo ship to bring up fresh supplies. For the very first time, a station could be refueled and restocked, which stretched its lifespan out dramatically. And this idea led directly to the modular design philosophy we use today. Instead of launching one giant thing, you start with a core unit. Then, over time, you launch and attach new pieces, new modules, and you just keep expanding the station as you need to. So, if the monolithic station was like a disposable RV, the modular station is like a giant Lego set. You can just keep adding new blocks, you can change the shape of it, and most importantly, you can keep resupplying it. This means it can have, in theory, an indefinite lifespan. This chart here gives us a really clear side-by-side look. Check out the key differences. For the launch, you go from needing one single massive rocket to using multiple, smaller, more manageable ones. The flexibility goes from being completely fixed to something you can expand and adapt. And here's the big one. The lifespan increases from just a few months to potentially decades. This was the shift that made living in space long-term a real possibility. And this modular principle is the foundation for every single major space station since then. It was pioneered with the Soviet Mir station, it was perfected with the International Space Station, and it's being used right now by China's Tiangong space station. So that brings us to today. We are now entering the next major era of space stations, and it's really being defined by two big things: commercial companies getting in the game and a renewed focus on going back to the moon. The goals themselves are evolving too. Government exploration is still super important, but now we're seeing this huge push to create actual economic opportunities in low Earth orbit for things like in-space manufacturing and private research. And at the same time, we're building the infrastructure we need around the moon to use it as a stepping stone for future missions, to places like Mars. And you won't believe how quickly this is all happening. Just look at this timeline of what's coming in just the next few years. We've got multiple commercial stations like Haven 1 and Starlab. We've got the Axiom Station, which is going to start its life attached to the ISS before becoming its own thing. And then there are these massive international projects, like the Lunar Gateway orbiting the moon, and new national stations from countries like India. It really is a new space race.
Okay, we have covered a ton of ground, from the very first disposable stations all the way to these future outposts around the moon. So let's just quickly run through the 4 key takeaways from all this.
First, and this is the big one, space is a really tough environment for the human body. Second, that first solution, the monolithic stations, they were like disposable RVs that had really short lives. Third, the absolute game-changing breakthrough was modular design, building stations like a Lego set in orbit, which lets them last for decades. And finally, we are right on the edge of a new explosion of both commercial and government stations that are going to define our future in space. Okay, to wrap this all up, here are 3 quick questions just to test your understanding. You can pause right here and see if you can answer them. First, what is that key fundamental difference between a monolithic and a modular station? Second, why was adding that second docking port on Salyut 6 such a critical innovation? And third, can you name one of the upcoming commercial stations and one of the new government stations? Thanks for joining our little lesson today.